also tune in, or people overseas. So yeah, thanks so much for joining Wild Conversations again. Wild Conversations is really a casual conversation over food and drink. So if you have your dinner, please eat, and you have questions, please ask away. And the whole purpose is really to gather like-minded individuals to kind of talk about different issues in conservation, highlight certain important issues, and today we'll be finding out more about migratory birds. We'd like to thank our venue partner. This beautiful space actually belongs to this community called Stranger Conversations. Okay, the one of the community members is here. Would you like to say something about Strangers Conversations?
Okay, I'll leave it to you. And anyone who's interested in Stranger Conversations, please come and find me after.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a beautiful community space made out of many wonderful individuals who, they're just a group of strangers coming together to do amazing things. So do check them out. They're on Telegram only. Instagram, Telegram, all the grams. Okay. Yeah, so go check them out. And come hang out here when you're free. Also, we like to thank our videographers who are there, Kelly, San, Wei Yang in the back end. And so we'll be taking photos. So if you don't want your photos to be posted on social media, please let us know. And of course, this is a free to attend conversation, but we always try to raise awareness and some funds for our partners. So for example, today we'll be raising funds for BirdLife. I won't explain what BirdLife is because we have the experts in the house, so I'll leave them to do that. I have a QR code right here, so you can scan the QR code and make your contributions. Maybe we'll just pass around this way. And of course, if you enjoy attending Wild Conversations, you can also make a small contribution to us. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's start with an introduction of our speaker today. So today, I think we have Ting Li. He is the conservation biologist at BirdLife International. He oversees BirdLife's work to protect wetlands, migratory birds, and several highly charismatic bird species, and worked closely with stakeholders around the region. He conducted his doctoral research at the Australian National University and has since worked widely across the region as well. He has written several books and papers on conservation of birds in Asia. Guess what? We have a book here written by and this is by coincidence,
Oh, really?
Yeah. Okay, can you tell us about the coincidence? So she brought the book and she placed it here. So if anyone wants to, have a look at this copy, when was this?
This is actually the bad news is that this book is outdated, 3 years.
Oh, 3 years.
Yeah, it was one of my pandemic projects.
Oh, this is a pandemic book, guys.
Yeah, it's a pandemic book, yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay, so if you'd like to take a look at it, you can pick it up from here. So before we start, I like to start off with a quiz to see how much our audience knows about the topic. If you're an expert, you can also answer, but please give those who are not a chance. But okay, let's start. Migration routes are called flyways. How many major flyways are there in the world? So I'll give you MCQ. 4A, 8B, 12C. So are there 4, 8, or 12? Who says 4? Raise your hands. None. Who says 8? Okay, we have a couple, almost 50%. Who says 12? Wow, okay, that's a lot. Wow. Okay, let's have the answer.
You're going to be surprised by the answer. I don't really know.
There are, by the way, all my answers are from birdlifeinternational.org, so you can find out from there.
But just a bit of background is that the reason why I say I don't really know is because depending on which scientist you ask, the number will be slightly different. So there are certain research teams around the world that tend to take a more liberal approach of breaking it down into smaller flyways. So some of these colleagues list as many as 11.
Wow.
11. Yeah, I'm quite conservative when it comes to defining flyways. So if you ask me, I would say as low as 7. As low as 7.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
4 is a bit too low. 4 is
a bit too low. But you know what? On your website it says 4. But maybe they're talking about
Yeah.
big fours, right?
Yeah,
so the
yeah.
big fours, which is true because the website sometimes the page size is only like that, so they
Yeah.
can only put 4. So the 4 are Central Asian, African Eurasian,
Yes.
Americas, and East Asian, Australasian. So it's very big. It's very,
It's a
very broad.
Broad scale. Yeah, broad
Correct.
scale.
So this is a broad scale
Yeah.
flyways. So there are 4 to 11 flyways. Now we know. Huh? Okay. The East Asian Australasian flyway. So that's where we are located. Is the most densely populated flyway, supporting almost 2 billion people. It also supports how many bird species across 37 countries from Alaska to Southeast Asia. So we want to know how many bird species that are being supported in this East Asian, Australasian flyway. So it's also MCQ. Is it 200 species A, 600 species B, or 2,000? So 200, anyone? Raise your hands. No. Okay, now scared. 600? Okay, a couple. And 2,000.
Wow.
Okay, should I say
Oh,
that?
this one I know the answer.
Okay.
This one I know the answer.
You
Because
go, you go.
I'm the one who invented those numbers.
Okay, good. We have the inventor here.
So I invented the numbers by looking at the migration bird by bird for every single bird in Asia. Asia has actually quite a lot of birds. If you look at the bird books and break down birds, as long as they overlap their distributions with just one little part of Asia, it gets counted. Right? So in total, this continent has about 3,100 bird species, which is quite high. But South America beat us by a few more hundred. The context to put into the picture is that South America is actually twice as small as Asia. So South America is actually quite dense in terms of species. But when it comes to birds that fly long distance, Asia wins hands down. Hands down. We have about, based on my last calculation, was 620 plus minus. I say plus minus because scientists don't always 100% agree with each other. So some will say like, I think we should split this species into a few more species. And then there'll be a few that are the conservative ones like me, lump them together. So I would say 580 to 620.
Yeah, because he invented it, he is spot on. So yes, that is very true. And the largest flyway is of course the Americas, right? Supporting over 2,000.
It has a lot of birds, but it doesn't mean that a lot more birds migrate. So the American flyways, by some definition, is actually 3 flyways. There's the Atlantic Coastal Flyway, the Pacific Coastal Flyway, and then the middle part of the Americas Flyway. So that flyway has, I say, 400 over species.
Wow.
400 over species,
Yeah, so a large number as well.
Yeah, but the Asian flyway is a bit special in the sense that I think from a geographical point of view, I know some of you are geographers, this flyway is very fragmented. So if you look at land masses, there's lots of bits of land around. So if you look at the American flyway, there's like Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and the 2 chains of Caribbean islands. But we have we have 3 mega archipelagos in this flyway. And we have just right at our doorstep, we have got Indonesia. That's about 13,000, depending on how you define islands, like it could be 13 to 17,000. You've got the Philippine archipelago, and the archipelago that people always forget about. One of my favorite archipelagos, the archipelago that gave us sashimi and sushi, is the Japanese archipelago. That's one chain of island. It's been kind of split. Bits of island went to Russia, and then the other lower bit of island went to a whole nation on its own.
Wow.
So
Very
lots of birds
interesting.
breed in Japan. So the next time you go there and look at your sakura or Kyoto visiting, look at the birds as well. Japan has lots of really special birds.
nice.
And most of Japan's birds migrate long distance. But Japan not only have birds that come here, they also get birds from even further north. So it's not that all their birds come here, then no more birds. Okay?
Yeah.
There are birds that are from the Arctic that will go to Japan.
Right. So is it like a stopover?
They spend their whole winter in Japan. These birds like cold, so they go from very cold to cold.
Cold.
Yeah, and then the other birds go from like cold to like warm. Yeah, in my view, one of the best looking eagles in the whole world is a bird called the Steller sea eagle. This bird breeds in the islands of Russia, but they all migrate to Hokkaido. So people who visit Hokkaido, I always tell them, look out for this eagle. It's so big that you'll never miss it. It's about like double the size of the fish eagles that we have in Singapore. Yeah.
Wow, huge.
Yeah.
Wow, amazing. Any questions about that?
I think we can make this a bit informal. People can
Yes,
ask questions as and when they
absolutely.
like. Because I don't want them to hear me rattling on for 2 hours. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Okay, one last question. So this one, the bar-tailed godwit, very popular. If you know about this bird, it's one bird to watch out for during the migration season. It's famous for its epic non-stop migration from Alaska to New Zealand, traveling non-stop for how many kilometers? Make a guess? 300? Raise your hands. Okay, you want to hear all the options, right? 800 and 12,000. So 300? Anybody? 300? It's like bidding system. 800? 12,000. Wow, everyone is correct.
Okay. I think they've been doing a reading up.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, like I mentioned, I think those are the questions to get everyone warmed up to find out a little bit more about migration, migratory routes. Yeah, we do have questions that were submitted from people, but if you guys are here, please feel free to ask them yourself. But maybe we'll start by asking Tingli to give us an introduction to what BirdLife is and more about the organization.
Yep, sounds
Self
good.
Koyo, yeah.
Yeah, can. Sounds good. I have to do that very often.
Yeah.
So, how many of you have never heard of BirdLife International before? First time? Okay, there's a few people here. Okay. So, there are not many conservation organizations around the world that works predominantly on birds. So BirdLife International is one of those very few NGOs that use birds a lot in our branding. So if you look at NGOs around the world, many NGOs, they've got like mammals as their logo. So I think the best known is WWF. They got a nice panda there. FFI has got an oryx on their logo, but BirdLife has a bird. Actually, that bird is not found in Singapore. It's got a bird species called the Arctic tern. And this bird is special in its in many different ways. It's also a migratory bird and flies long distance. Yeah. So BirdLife International, we are headquartered in the United Kingdom. Actually, our main office is embedded within a building that I call myself often going there for pilgrimages. Our headquarters is called the David Attenborough Building. So there's such a building in Cambridge University, which houses the Department of Zoology, so all the animal-minded people, researchers on ecology, all the hard science biologists, they'll be there. And then there's a few levels of NGOs, and we are, I think, on second and third story. So the way BirdLife works is interesting. We work through partnership. We are a global NGO, but we work through a unique model whereby we work with national partner organizations. So our ambition is to have at least one national partner per country, depending on countries. Some countries may need more partners because they are big or they're culturally quite diverse. So we have a one partner per country model. So for the case of Singapore, we work exclusively with the Nature Society. So NSS has got the director
today,
here.
NSS
Right?
rep.
They are our partner in Singapore, and pretty much all the work that we do in Singapore is done in collaboration with NSS. So for those of you who are interested, in about 2 weeks from now, we'll be running a annual bird watching competition, which has ran on for quite a while, as old as myself, this bird watching competition. It's called the Singapore Bird Race. I will not disclose. Yeah, the Singapore Bird Race is a large-scale bird watching competition. It started off with just about like 2-3 teams in the 80s, and then the last year, the number of people taking part has grown quite, I would say, exponentially. Last year we had more than 360 people participating in hundreds of teams. So I think it's changed quite a lot, and I feel like besides the fact that NSS is driving people to be interested in nature, the growth is also a broader reflection of how Singaporean society as a whole has become more engaged with the natural world. So it's a good sign to me, So coming back to BirdLife, we work through these networks of, currently we have 125 organizations. I think we have more partners in Europe and Africa, partly because Europe and Africa have more countries. Some of our partners are very big NGOs on their own. So for those of you who are familiar with British conservation or American conservation, our partner in the United States is the Audubon Society, which on its own is much bigger than BirdLife as a whole organization, because they have got chapters in almost all the United States states. And then in the UK, we've got the RSPB. It's the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. It's a very old NGO. I think it was founded last century. shortly after Singapore became a straight settlement. So RSPB is an ONGO with long history working to conserve birds, and they've got currently a million paying members.
Wow.
So that money from membership, that is how conservation is driven. We basically bring those resources together and remobilize them.
Yeah.
BirdLife works through programs. Programs, you could think of programs as little parcels of work that are defined by common themes. So some of these programs deal with very obvious environmental issues. So you ask me, are you dealing with climate change? Yes, we are dealing with climate change. We have a climate change program. We have got climate change experts in the organization whose job is to look at climate change related issues in relation to wildlife. So that's the climate change program. But more importantly, in Asia, as many of you would know, Asia's most important ecosystem for wildlife are, what are the most important ecosystems for wildlife in Asia? Tropical rainforest, excellent. So rainforest is a big part of our, I call it, business model. We work on many kind of forest projects around the region, but also projects that are targeted at species that live in rainforests. So we have another specific program that aims to protect some of these high-profile species. We call it the Preventing Extinctions Program. The idea is very simple. We want to work with the local people to prevent these really rare and threatened birds, threatened under international criteria. You all have heard about the Red Data Book. Have you heard of the Red Data Book? The Red Data Book comes in many forms and sizes. We have a national Red Data Book. Some of you may have been involved in compiling the national Red Data Book. But internationally, we also have a global Red Data Book. And that is basically, I won't call it a document, but basically it's a database of every plant and animal, every organism practically out there that has been assessed by scientists in relation to a set of fixed criteria. So scientists will look at the latest science on, let's say, okay, I wouldn't use birds as an example. Let's say this kind of rare monkey or this rare frog. We'll look at what's known about its distribution, how many of them are out there, what are the decline trends over time, and make certain conclusions about how seriously in trouble the species is. So we've got the global Red Data Book. At BirdLife, we are responsible for the world's birds on the Red Data Book. So I've got a bunch of colleagues with me who are headquartered in the UK, and their job, I think they have the most fun job ever. Yeah, every day they are looking at bird books, bird papers, bird books, and making decisions like, I think this species should be proposed for this category. And then they also reach out to other bird experts, calling up people, organizing workshops, and asking them for an opinion. So their job is basically to synthesize what is known about how threatened the species is. So this is the global Red Data Book. When you see people saying that, oh, the helmeted hornbill is critically endangered, that's because BirdLife have worked with the local NGOs, the scientists, to assess it and give it that status. And this status is important because this status is a kind of prioritization. Now let's put it this way. In conservation, there are numerous challenges that we face. Challenges in Singapore, challenges outside of Singapore. We cannot save everything, let's face the reality, right? So a lot of conservation biologists always talk about prioritization. We gotta put our bang for the buck. We gotta spend money where we can make the biggest difference. So the red list is a way of prioritization. We prioritize which are the species we should be investing more money in terms of conservation projects. And a lot of donors actually take the red list very carefully and seriously. They're like, this species is critically endangered. Okay, we want more resources and we are willing to give you more grants to protect those species. So one way of prioritization is to look at the species, BirdLife, we also have a program that's dedicated towards prioritization of areas that are important for biodiversity. So we've got the IBA program. Some of you have heard of the IBA. Maybe not many of you have. How many of you know what an important bird area is? Show of hands? One. Okay, one. So important bird areas are basically prioritization of what areas, what sites at the landscape scale are important for protecting birds. And again, it's based on very strict criteria. For an area to be considered an important bird area, it needs to have some population thresholds of some species, especially highly threatened species or big congregation of birds. So BirdLife has basically worked with our partnership across the world to figure out where all these IBAs are. I think as of now, we have identified 15,000 across the planet. 15,000 IBAs, which in our view, if we were to be able to secure resources to protect these 15,000 IBAs, we would have secured a huge chunk of the world's biodiversity. So IBAs are a very big thing for us. And even in Singapore, we have IBAs. We have, I think, of last count, we have 3 IBAs in Singaporean territory. Yeah.
Where is it?
They are actually very familiar places that you go, but you never realize that they were IBAs. For example, if you went to Sungai Buloh is an IBA. But the IBA's spatial designation is not necessarily going to overlap 100% with the boundary of Sungai Buloh, because there are areas immediately outside of Sungai Buloh that could be important for biodiversity as well.
Right.
So the IBAs often go beyond the boundary of an existing protected area. Yeah. Another major IBA for us in Singapore is called it's got this really complex name, but I'll just reduce it to a place that we all know, Pulau Ubin. So Pulau Ubin is an IBA. It is an IBA because Pulau Ubin has some really threatened species. In fact, those of you who follow the conservation news in Singapore for birds, you know that one of the rarest birds on the planet lives in Singapore. And this bird makes a wonderful song. I think most of you who go to any nature park will have heard it. Yeah. Straw-headed bulbul, yeah. So people know about
Here
the
there's
straw-headed bulbul.
a common bird guide here somehow. All the animal
Is it on
things
this guide?
No, actually I don't know.
I'll be surprised
hear.
if it's on this guide, because this guide is dated.
Oh, it's dated,
yeah,
is it?
so it may not have featured the straw-headed bulbul. But just to give you a bit of perspective about
Yeah,
how
2017.
rare this straw-headed bulbul is, I work with conservationists from Indonesia who have surveyed huge parts of Sumatra, and years of survey have found zero. There are no straw-headed bulbuls left in Sumatra. To a lot of the local Indonesian bird experts, finding a straw-headed bulbul in Indonesia is a myth. It's like finding Loch Ness Monster. So we have kind of given up on straw-headed bulbul in Java. Hope, no hope. Sumatra, no hope. And now we believe the vast majority of the world's straw-headed bulbuls left in Singapore and in Peninsular Malaysia. But even in Peninsular Malaysia, they're getting rare, because I grew up in Kuala Lumpur, and near to where I live, there's a park that I can see them when I was in high school or secondary school. But the last time I went there, they're gone. I went there, they're gone. I asked a few other people who have been there in recent years, and they say they've not seen any. So I assume that they have really been trapped out by people. Yeah.
Yep.
So Singapore is really special for straw-headed bulbul. I've not even gone to migratory species yet. I'm just talking generally about conservation. Yeah. So we have got 3. Yes, question.
Can I ask a question? Why do you think they are all like congregated in Pulau Ubin?
Which birds?
You need to repeat the question for the live stream.
Okay. What was your question?
Can I ask why the straw-headed bulbul, you said they can be found in Pulau Ubin?
Oh, okay. So
why are they like congregated there versus like not Indonesia?
okay. So straw-headed bulbul has a very interesting story for those of us working on the songbird trade. Now, let me make a very broad and you could say a sweeping statement. Many Asian cultures love to keep pet birds. Agree? Disagree?
Yeah.
Agree. I think many people agree, right?
Absolutely.
And that includes ourselves in Singapore. There's a culture of keeping pet birds. However, there are geographical differences. Depending on where you are in Asia, different birds are more sought after than other birds. So typically, these are the birds that are normally found in that part of the world. So for example, in China, a lot of people like to keep bulbuls as pets, because bulbuls are the common bird, and you can easily, and they have a nice song anyway. In Southeast Asia, a lot of people who keep birds, they consider straw-headed bulbul to have one of the finest song of any tropical bird. The song is rich. If you have heard a straw-headed bulbul call, it's really complex, got many different glissandos, high tones, low tones, very complex song. And as a result of its really wonderful song, people want to keep them in captivity. So over the last 20 years, people seek out for straw-headed bulbuls everywhere they go. And I think most parts of Southeast Asia, they are now hunted out. So Singapore is special for 2 reasons, because we have pretty good conservation frameworks in the country, so there are not much poaching going on. I mean, there's poaching happening here and there, but not to the level of many of our surrounding countries. And Pulau Ubin has got the perfect kind of habitat for the straw-headed bulbuls. They actually are not birds that live in dense rainforests. They like to live at forest edges, and especially around water bodies. So if you look at Pulau Ubin has so many quarries and a bit of woodland around it. That is what straw-headed bulbul loves. So you can see lots of them there in Pulau Ubin. Yeah. So hope that
Very
answers
nice.
your question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Quick question.
Yes.
Just picking picking up on something you said, and it's something that I've always wondered.
Yeah.
Anytime I go birding in Bukit Timah,
Mhm.
I'm lucky if I get like 3 species. Right?
Mm.
And why is that? You know, you think such a nice, rich, lush habitat, you'll find a lot of birds.
Well, actually, Bukit Timah is very special nationally for biodiversity conservation. It's got a high concentration of biodiversity in general. The challenge that Bukit Timah has faced over the last few decades is that it's a bit of an isolated forest fragment. So when forests become smaller and patchier, they tend to lose species over time. It's a natural tendency of small forest patches. In conservation biology, there's a lot of work that's been done around the world looking at forest patches in Amazon rainforest, in Indonesia, blah, blah, blah. So Bukit Timah, as a result of its small size, is kind of like bleeding species. Because when the habitat becomes too small, the population of animals within also becomes small as a result, right? And there'll be inbreeding depression, there'll be some kind of migration going on, birds will move to central catchment. So because of that, there are fewer and fewer birds there. But there are some birds that are still doing pretty well in Bukit Timah, including some species of conservation concern. Yeah, yeah. The other thing is that from a bird watching point of view, Bukit Timah is very hard to watch birds. So you see few birds doesn't mean there are no birds. Because
But you also don't hear many calls.
okay.
So maybe it's just a timing thing.
It could be the timing. Yeah, it could be the timing. Yeah, yeah. Typically, when we do Bukit Timah surveys, usually one morning will be a count of about 32 species. 32 species. Yeah, but I would say that half of them were detected by sound. I didn't really see them. You know that they're around because they called from somewhere around. Yeah.
Right.
So coming back to the flyways, I've still
Yes.
not gone to the flyways. In BirdLife, we have the wonderful flyway program, which I'm
Yes.
the coordinator for Asia. As you've seen in the earlier spiel on the flyways, we have got two really important flyways in Asia. So Asia is a big continent. Just to put things into context, 2/3 of the Earth's population is in Asia. I just don't know how many people think of such things, but you've got India, that's a lot of people. You've got China, and you've got Southeast Asia. And if you add these three chunks of Asia together, that's already like 4 billion over people. So when huge numbers of human beings come into contact with very diverse wildlife habitats, the outcome is lots of conservation challenges because people will use natural resources. Yeah. So for the flyways program in Asia, we have 2 major flyways. The one that we are part of, and we know that we are part of it because every year bird watchers in Singapore, we go out to look for birds. We will see migratory birds around. This is the East Asian Australasian flyway, which I think you've covered a little bit just now. And then further to the west, we've got the Central Asian flyway, which is, these flyways are geographically described, like Central Asia because it connects Central Asia with the Indian subcontinent. So that's another major flyway. We are right in the middle of the East Asian Australasian flyway, and like you mentioned, there are lots of bird species migrating along this flyway. Some of these birds are actually very common, and you don't even have to go to a fancy nature reserve to see them. You know, every time I do these talks, I tell people that they are actually very common migratory birds that are in your car park. If you go out to your office early enough and listen around, you will hear migratory birds if you are there at the right time of the year. I do that actually because my walk to work, my commute to work requires me to pass through some like secondary forests. So every day I walk to office, I was like listening for stuff. Like, oh, okay, there's a warbler in the tree. And warblers are long distance migrants. I really love warblers. I call them the underdogs of migration because nobody cares about them. They
they're
are
so
very tiny. They are brown. And most of them are very hard to tell apart from other kinds of warblers. So one of the ones that come to Singapore that I guarantee that you will see if you pay attention tomorrow when you go to work, look up for little jumpy birds in the trees, right? We have the Arctic warbler, and the Arctic warbler is here. Today I heard 3 in my compound, so they are around. And my compound is surrounded by housing estates, so that tells you that they can thrive in, I don't use the word thrive, but they can survive in landscapes that are quite built up. So we've got things like the Arctic warbler, but we've also got some really rare migratory birds. Yeah, I'm not sure if you have a chance to put the PowerPoint up. Yeah, but I can. If you can go to the slide 7, I think. Yeah. So I've already covered all these things without looking at the slides. But I'll just go straight to one of the slides, looking at.
Tell me when to stop.
Yeah. Actually, this is an important slide that I wanted to talk about, but we can come back to that later.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, we've also briefly touched on that. We've briefly touched on the programs, straw-headed bulbuls as you expected, flyways, forests,
This one.
This is the Arctic warbler. If you've got
Okay.
sound, you can
Yes.
play the sound and let everyone hear
This-
what this.
Is it this?
Yeah.
Oh wait,
Okay.
maybe it's
Maybe
like
the-
very soft.
Yeah, maybe it's a bit soft. Yeah. See if you've got sound. Yeah.
Oh no,
If no, then it's okay.
cannot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not to worry. Yeah. So that's the Arctic warbler, one of the commonest migratory birds that we have here. Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah. Not to
it's playing, but there's no sound.
worry. Yeah. Very strange, but yeah, it's okay. Okay, go on to the next slide now. So the next slide, I'm going to introduce you to one of the rarest migratory birds in the world. Can,
Is it the one on the landing slide? Your landing slide?
Yeah, the landing slide and the bird on my T-shirt.
Oh,
actually,
okay.
yeah. So this is the spoon-billed sandpiper, and I wanted to show you one of very few photographs taken of a spoon-billed sandpiper. A lot of you may be wondering why I'm so uptight about this bird, and I keep talking about it again and again. It's on my T-shirt, it's on my slides, everywhere. But this is because this is a bird that BirdLife is spending a lot of our resources to protect. And protecting the spoon-billed sandpiper is really tough because this bird is a migratory bird. It flies long distances, breeding in places that nobody here will ever go, and then they come to Southeast Asia. This picture was taken from Singapore, and one of very few pictures. I can't even tell you when this picture was taken because there has been no spoon-billed sandpiper spotted in Singapore since 1999. So that was the last time. It was found by yours truly. I was a bird watcher in 1999, so you can now tell how old I am. And this photograph was taken at a place that some of you have been to without realizing. This is taken at Terminal 3 of Changi Airport. So where this photo was taken, back then it was a swamp, it was a piece of wetland. And Changi Airport Terminal 3 and 4 were freshly reclaimed. It was like muddy, there's a bit of mud flats, a little bit of mangroves popping out. And in the year 1999, on Christmas Eve, I had this great idea of going to Changi to watch birds. I was a schoolboy, so I had to ask people to send me into Changi. It's a long way in, by the way. To get to this spot, you have to drive, I think, at least 3 kilometers into a kind of semi-reclaimed area. Yeah, and that was when we found the last spoon-billed sandpiper. There's ever been only 2 sightings in Singapore post-independence. The first one was seen in 1966, and then the second one was 1999, and then since then there's been no more spoonies. Yeah. So it's a very special bird. Very special background. Most of the new generation of bird watchers in Singapore will not have seen it. And people always ask me, Ding Li, do you think next year we can see a spoonie in Sungai Buloh? I said, you don't hope against probability theory. Okay. So I doubt we'll ever see one again because anything that becomes rare, the chances of you seeing it also drops by mathematical probability. So you ask me where to see them. Where's the best place to see them? I say go to Vietnam because Vietnam, there are still some large areas of mud flats that people are monitoring every year, or go to Thailand, which is the place that most bird watchers will visit to see the spoon-billed sandpiper.
I see.
Yeah. So you can do another click and then you will see a picture of it. This is where it was taken from Vietnam. This photograph is 3 years old. It was during a survey that I was doing in Vietnam with some of my Vietnamese collaborators in the Mekong Delta. So what's the big deal about the spoon-billed sandpiper? Now I'm going to go into the serious things. So the spoon-billed sandpiper is a very rare migratory bird. Some of you will be saying things like, it's so rare, we know it's going to go extinct, why should we conserve it? What's the biggie? There are a few arguments I've always tried to make to my friends and colleagues. Like, okay, I know it's just a brown bird. Most of us will probably never see it in our lifetime. But the bird is also hugely symbolic. It's a symbolic bird of the whole flyway. Partly because this bird travels across the entire part of the flyway, all the way down to as far south as Indonesia. It is very rare. The current estimate of the population is, if I remember correctly, it was somewhere between 350 to 650 birds. And we are quite sure of these numbers because a lot of my colleagues are like hardcore modelers. They have tagged the birds, right? There's a team of my colleagues who work in Siberia whose job is to catch the birds when they arrive from their breeding grounds, catch them, and then tag them. And once you have tagged some number of birds, you can use some very basic logic to extrapolate. If I've tagged so many birds and I refine so many birds, I can come out with an equation that allows me to derive a number for the whole population. And that's what we call mark resample. I think some of you who work on wildlife biology, you will know about mark resampling technique. So I've got some colleagues who are mathematical genius. They do all these calculations. They call people and say, okay, I want you to go out to a mudflat in Thailand and count spoonbill sandpipers, and then count them again and see how many of them have a tag on their legs. Come back again tomorrow and do the same thing. Come back again on the third day and do the same thing. And once you have done that, we'll do some basic proportions, and with that you can derive a number. So we've actually got a very good estimate of this population, which, as I've said, is less than 650 birds. But this bird also symbolizes the threats migratory birds face in general. So when I talk about spoonbill sandpiper, I can talk about not just the fact that it connects many different countries in Asia, it also faces dangers that are kind of representative of birds in general in this flyway. So the spoonbill sandpiper live in two very different kinds of habitats. In the season where it breeds in spring, the bird lives in Russia, right? Only in Russia. And we don't even know all the places in Russia because now it's very hard to do fieldwork in Russia, as many of you would know, right? But we have one team working in one village in Russia. They go there year on year, count them all, tag them all. Those that come back without a tag, they get tagged. So, and then they do this work again and again. And they basically are conducting work in a landscape of tundra. A tundra is basically these kind of Arctic marshy landscapes. The birds live in these little boggy areas. They nest on the ground, which means that they're really vulnerable to predators. What are the predators in the Arctic? Does anybody know? There are two big predators that eat birds. One is the Arctic fox. The second one are these kind of birds that are, there are no eagles living in this part of the Arctic, but there are these kind of birds called the Jaegers or skewers. Skewers are predators of spoonbill sandpiper chicks. And actually, I remember one report that I've gone through, we lost a couple of spoonbill sandpiper chicks to a Jaeger. So that was quite a bit of a loss for the population. Yeah. So, and then they come to Southeast Asia where they live in mudflats. Mudflats are totally different from the tundra that they breed in. Mudflats are, from many people's point of view, wastelands because I'd rather the mudflats to be covered by mangrove trees than just little brown blobs there out at the coastal areas. So for the longest time, a lot of people don't appreciate or understand the value of mudflats. So you go anywhere from China to Southeast Asia, people are like, okay, these are areas that we can expand infrastructure. So a lot of the world's mudflats have been actually reclaimed into new pods, new recreational areas. Same thing for Southeast Asia. A lot of mudflats are gone, even here in Singapore, because of infrastructure expansion. So spoonies, they face these threats, and on top of that, they are also in trouble from hunters. You may be wondering who hunts these birds, but there are a lot of people out there who hunt birds. Some people hunt birds for a living. Some people hunt birds for fun. And a lot of people, they put out these mist nets at the wetlands. The purpose of the mist nets is to basically catch birds and sell those birds for food. People are out there actually hunting birds for food. So this is a major threat to the spoonbill sandpiper. And we know that they get killed in these nets because there have been numerous instances when my colleagues are doing the surveys, they found the spoonies being killed in those nets. So
But
we know
is it allowed? Like, are people allowed to do that in general, or they're doing it illegally?
it's a bit complicated, because different countries have different laws. A bird that could be protected in this country may not be protected in another species, in another jurisdiction. And I was just talking to a colleague recently about how the law works in different countries. So depending on which country you are either protected or you're in trouble. So if you are protected, nothing happens to you, hopefully. But if you are in a country where you're not protected, then you will be vulnerable to hunting.
Right.
So I'll give you the example of a shorebird. Shorebirds in Russia generally are not protected by law. It could be that there are some species are protected, but other species are generally not protected. And you ask the hunter, oh, by the way, you cannot hunt that species. They're like, oh, the bird is 200 meters away. I can't really tell for sure that I'm shooting this bird species or that bird species. And anyway, legally in Russia, I can shoot all these species. So that is a challenge for people in the Russian Far East. And then when the bird fly into China's territory, okay, it's a blessing because in China, a spoonbill sandpiper is protected fully to the full extent of the law. So if you trap a spoonbill sandpiper in a China wetland, you could be prosecuted, and you could go to jail. So they are kind of well protected. And then the birds fly over to Southeast Asia, and then the law changed again, like, oh, suddenly you're in another landmass whereby you are not protected by law, because in our country we protected this 26 species of birds, but you are not in the list. So if somebody hunted you, technically it's not illegal. So these are the challenges that migratory birds face. A bird that's stuck only in one country will not have these challenges, because they'll be subjected to the law of just that country. But migratory birds fly across countries and jurisdictions. So some places you're protected, some places you're not protected. And that makes them really vulnerable to different kinds of threats.
But doesn't BirdLife come up with, like, I mean, you guys work in 127 countries.
23.
So you 23 countries. So you advise, like, advisory, I mean, you come up with advisories to, I guess, national bodies to come up with regulations on what bird species ought to be protected, including the migratory birds. Yeah. But you mean, so for them, I'm sure they would defer to experts.
They'll work with researchers, and of course there's a lot of local experts in all the countries of the flyway. There are many things that we do to protect birds. So in Singapore, for example, it's a bit clear-cut, because pretty much all of Singapore bird species are protected by law. I'm not sure how many of you are actually aware of this. We have one act that protects all birds of Singapore, with exceptions of a few which are considered as pests. But not every country in the world is like that. Depending on the legal legacy of the country, there are countries out there whereby you have the whole chunk of birds that are not protected by law. Some of our neighboring countries, for example, they will protect only a subset of their bird species. Another country that's very similar to us is Thailand. So Thailand's law protects pretty much all bird species in Thailand. But these are best case scenarios. So protecting birds is obviously a big part of it is to have the legislation in place to protect them from being hunted. But of course that's just not all, because in many parts of Asia, these birds are in rural areas. They are in areas that are in need of development, and people have very little access to livelihoods. So if you ask me to conserve species, changing or helping governments to improve the law is not the only solution. To help wildlife, we also have to help local people and let the local people have a better understanding of why this species is important to you. In some places, it could become a bit easier, because tourists come to these parts of Asia to see some rabbits, and they're willing to pay money. So local people will see, oh, actually, if I protect this bird, I can get money from tourism. So I will do my best to protect this species. This can happen for some species in some places, but not necessarily everywhere around Asia. So we are working with people to help them appreciate the ecotourism dollars from bird watching. But more importantly, a lot of the work that BirdLife is doing is to work with fishermen and farmers, because the fishermen and the farmers are the people who use the wetlands. So if you get them engaged, and if you provide them with livelihood support, they are more likely to play a part in your conservation projects. These are things that we don't tend to think a lot about in Singapore, but when I work in Burma, Myanmar, or in Cambodia, livelihood issues are like a big part of my day-to-day thinking on conservation.
Absolutely. Wow. Thanks for sharing. Are there any questions from the floor? Yeah.
How do you help their livelihoods? Like these are samples.
We have many approaches. So tourism is an easy one, because if an area attracts a rare bird, and if people from, let's say, Europe are willing to come here and spend lots of money to see those birds, immediately you can benefit the local people. So for example, when you bring a group of tourists here, the tourists may pay a fee, and that fee could go into the local community's kind of common pool of funds, and people were like, oh, actually we are getting money from people who come here to see the birds. There's a project that I'm very involved in BirdLife. So we are working with our Cambodian national partner to basically work with farmers to protect a landscape for cranes. And we realize that these cranes are going to rice fields. But the rice fields may not be the most hospitable places for the cranes, because people are hunting things in a rice field. People are chugging a lot of herbicides, to make the soil fertile. You need to kill insects. You need to increase soil fertility. So our work here is to work with farmers to pursue more, you could say, biodiversity-friendly ways of farming. So we create incentives for that. And we try to get them to be involved year on year. And after a while, we try to sell their rice products at a premium. So again, this is tying monetary benefits to wildlife protection, and it's shown some good signs of success. But of course, I have to say that it's still very early days. Some of these initiatives, they do take a while to mature. Yeah, but broadly speaking, it's important to make local people see some kind of economic gain from wildlife protection. If we can do that, I think we can win the race to save biodiversity. But often it's a challenge, because not everybody is cooperative. Everybody have different agendas in different landscapes. Yeah.
How long does it take for you to like work with someone like a farmer? You know, like what is the process like, and the length of time for a project to say start maybe?
Well, the work that we are doing on cranes have been started since pre-pandemic times. I think in 2018 we started consulting people to test for interest. You can't just do like that, right? You need to talk to local people. Sometimes I do find that a lot of my work is very PR, building relationships, And so when people ask me what is the recipe to success, you have to build those relationships and maintain those relationships as long as you can. But more importantly, you have to find a local person who is a leader, who is influential and can influence other members of his community to be a part of the initiative. If you can find this person in the community, you may be successful. But of course, to achieve that kind of success, you need years of being on the ground. Being on the ground is important. I can't just sit in my office and write emails and expect conservation to succeed. I have to go there, meet with our team members, talk to the farmers, interview the farmers to show that we are listening to, not just to show that we are listening to their points of views, but also to show that we are acting on some of the things that they want us to support them with. And then promoting a sense of ownership, I think is very important for local people. In many parts of the world, people don't have that close attachment to nature, so we are trying to create that attachment by telling them that, hey, you got this really special animal on your land, and people are willing to come here and pay you money to see it. And if you protect it, you can also get more financial incentives from the rice products that you sell. So I think in the last few years, more and more such incentives are popping up all over Asia. I can think of at least 3 or 4 initiatives in Southeast Asia looking at creating bird-friendly landscapes. Because a lot of birds use rice fields. I know there are no rice fields in Singapore, but if you go to Malaysia or go to Thailand, just walk around the rice fields, okay? Fall around, slaughter yourself in mud, but you will see a lot of birds in the rice fields. And that's why I'm a staunch advocate of making these rice fields wildlife friendly.
Cool, thanks. You had a question?
Yes.
I have 2 questions. So my first question is, a lot of landscapes that aren't really charismatic, like tropical rainforests, they really have a very strong imagery of exoticism, and you really want to protect it, and there's a lot of money going into it and activism. But there are these landscapes that are a bit more ignored, like mudflats, grasslands, then on these edge ecosystems, right? So how do you kind of influence policymakers to improve protection for these landscapes?
I think as conservationists, we have to try to be as creative as possible. I believe many of us in this room are also conservationists working on different projects in Singapore or in the region. We have to suddenly become salesmen, saleswomen. How do you sell an ecosystem that nobody cares about? How can you use emerging narratives and emerging science? And as part of BirdLife, we believe in using the evidence base to build these narratives. In the last 10 years, one of the strongest narratives for conserving a wetland, including wetlands that are not particularly appealing to people, is to demonstrate its role in carbon sequestration. So carbon sequestration has become a big part of conservation. We try to argue for ecosystem services. We found that after years of using wildlife to sell forests, wildlife to sell wetlands, it's not getting through. So in the last few years, we are trying to shift that argument to carbon. And because the global policy frameworks for carbon have moved really quickly these days, when you talk climate change, people will pay attention. So nowadays, we are increasingly, I use the word increasingly, using the climate change narrative to sell habitats that are not really attractive to people. Like mud flats, for example. You ask me mud flats, what are they good for? What are mud flats good for? Actually, mud flats have many more roles than we realized, because you didn't realize that a lot of the stuff that you ate came from the mud flats. My common seller for mud flat is laksa, because when I sell laksa, there's always hum. All right, laksa have hum, right? So people would think about the hum, but hum is the connection between the things that you eat and the mud flats. So for people who don't know anything about mud flats, I will bring up this argument of cockles and clams. I personally like to eat clams, by the way. And again, clams are from mud flats, so you have to use the connection with people to build that understanding. At the same time, you also leverage on climate change arguments to promote awareness. But still, a lot of wetlands, a lot of ecosystems are still not as profound as some other ecosystems. Like rainforests, they do get a lot of attention. But you know that when you look at forests, there are many kinds of forests in the world. There are limestone forests, and limestone forests are not getting enough attention, but they're getting hammered because we all need limestone to build HDB flats. We all need limestone to build apartments. We need limestone to basically build almost everything, because the cement that you chuck into, the construction estate, that is from sand and limestone. So they are a really imperiled kind of ecosystem that I think some of my colleagues are working really hard to get people to pay attention to them. In Malaysia, there are quite a few conservation battles revolving around limestones. Yeah, I'm not sure how many of you go to places like Ipoh. How many of you have been to Ipoh? You go to Ipoh, you'll be looking around and finding all these hills around Ipoh. All these hills are limestone, and if you don't protect them, they will all end up becoming the cement mixture. Yeah. Your second question, you have two questions, right?
My second question is to do more with citizen science.
Citizen science.
I just moved to Singapore a couple of months ago, so I'm still getting familiar with the whole citizen science ecosystem here.
Yeah.
But where I was working in India, eBird is a big thing, right? And the NGOs that I used to work with, they use a lot of eBird data to conduct population surveys and understand the trends of birds in India. So how has your experience been in using citizen science eBird data and community engagement in Singapore?
I think the experience is so far so good. I acknowledge eBird is a really powerful tool for conservation. And actually, I'm very close to the eBird India team. They are all my friends. When the documents get published, they do come to me and ask me to look at some of the trends for India as well. In Singapore and in much of Southeast Asia, citizen science is becoming big. Yeah, and I think in Singapore, eBird has grown as well. From the point that I remember many years ago when I was in university, there were only like 10 regular users of eBird. That's in the mid-2000s. And if we look at an average number of people who use eBird every day in Singapore, it's like
very low.
it's gone like way beyond that already. Yeah, but of course, citizen science is not just eBird. There are also other initiatives in Singapore. I think the Nature Society, again, I come back to NSS. NSS has a lot of initiatives to promote citizen science. Some of these are targeted at school children. There's a school children targeted initiative. Perhaps my NSS colleagues can share a little bit about it later on. But there are also initiatives that are targeted more broadly at bird watchers. A lot of bird watchers are not like professional conservationists. They have other jobs in their, they have other day jobs basically, but they like to watch birds. So in the NSS, every year there are censuses organized to bring all these recreational bird watchers and some really serious birders together to go out and count birds. And that information is actually very useful. I can give you one classic example. Just 2 years ago when we were working on the Singapore Red Data Book, we realized that we didn't have good information on the trends of birds in Singapore. And so I call up my colleagues at the Nature Society. I like, do we have data? Of course we have data. We have 30 years of citizen science monitoring since 1988. So since 1988, we've got this thing called the annual bird census. And you've got all these bird watchers, very passionate individuals who go out to Central Catchment, to Pulau Ubin to count birds. And some of these sites are still being counted today. So that is citizen science. as much as eBird is citizen science. There are many different flavors of citizen science. There are some very open platforms like eBird, and also iNaturalist is also being used by many people around the world. I like to use one platform called Sino Canto, which is for bird sounds, and I'm like religious about how I use Sino Canto. I religiously use it almost every week. But there are also targeted initiatives led by the Nature Society or even the National Parks Board. The National Parks Board has got quite a number of bird counts, like they have got a heron count. And again, these counts bring out all these bird watchers to go out on their weekends to look at birds. Yeah, there's one count that I do a lot with my Nature Society colleagues, and that's the parrot count. So we've been doing this parrot count. It was invented. I used the word invent. It was invented in 2012, and now we are in the 10th year of the parrot count. Yeah, we are still going around HDB estates looking out for parrots at dusk. And now people need that information. They can use the parrot count data that has been accumulated over 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Same for many other countries. Some countries are embracing citizen science faster than other countries. There are still many countries where long way to go. We still have to get people interested in nature, but I think Singapore is far ahead in the citizen science game because there's so much information around. There are packages. There are even packages for you to identify birds on your phone. I think some of you may have heard of the Merlin app. It's created by the folks at Cornell University. So you can use the Merlin app to identify birds. There are also other apps. There's another app that I use. It's a China-produced app, but this app is quite clever. It uses AI to identify bird sounds.
Is it accurate?
So far, so good.
So
I
far.
verified against myself, like me versus app. Like, yeah, we agree. If we agree, then it's kind of correct. Yeah. So I use that more and more in my field work nowadays. Not that I do a lot of field work, but it's very useful for field trips. Yeah.
What's the name of that app?
The app has a Mandarin Chinese name, and the name is kind of self-explanatory. Yeah. In Mandarin, we call it Dong Niao. Yeah, and I use it quite often for bird watching. Yeah.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I have one about artificial habitat. You've explained a lot about how those natural ones are
Yes.
very important for birds and migration stuff. I was wondering, like, Singapore is a very good example of building like rooftop garden, high-rise mainland. Are they actually helping the birds, or we just create the illusion that we're thinking that we're good for the ecologists?
I think you've got a really interesting point there. Unfortunately, I wish I have some colleagues to save me with this question because I cannot give you the fullest answer possible. I don't think enough about rooftop gardens. I do believe that they are useful for biodiversity.
And also like indoor green spaces, like Changi has all this green garden.
Yeah.
Like all the trees was growing, was thriving inside of like covered up roofs, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's really coming here, it's really helping like the flyway and everything, right?
Yeah, I'll give you a very standard scientist answer. More research needed. More research needed. Yeah. Yeah, but there are some very large-scale projects led by some of my colleagues looking at how biodiversity is using like rooftop gardens. Yeah, I've not seen the reports myself, so I don't think I'm in a position to give you a really good answer. But I can say that elsewhere around the world, we actually need artificial habitats to mitigate habitat loss that migratory species have suffered. So I'll give you two examples. In South Korea, we have actually got a project in South Korea. My colleagues work in South Korea for some years. And Korea is a very popular tourist country for many people in Singapore. This is a part of Korea that most people probably have never visited. Yeah, most people go to Korea, they go to Incheon and Seoul and Busan and bye-bye, that's it, right? But we have a project in the middle part of South Korea in a county called Socheon. Socheon County is in the middle part of the South Korea on the Yellow Sea, West Sea side of the Korean coastline. And the Korean coastline is incredibly important for migratory birds. The next time you take an aeroplane to Incheon International Airport, before the aeroplane lands on the runway, you look out your window, take the window seat, and you'll see that before the plane lands, there's massive mud flats in Korea. And these mud flats in Korea are used by hundreds and thousands of migratory birds. These are what I call the stopover, the staging point. Before the birds arrive in Southeast Asia, they have to rest in Korea, they have to rest in China. And these mudflats in South Korea are really important. But the thing about Korea is that Korea has a very huge population. Much of the Korean countryside has been farmed intensively. So a kind of habitat that migratory birds need is really in short supply. A lot of migratory birds need a place to rest at high tide. Right? You don't expect migratory birds to be floating around the sea, you know, when they've done with their feeding. They do need a place to stand and rest, and then they go out to feed again. So one of the big challenges we have, not just with the Korean coastline, but also with the North China coastline, is that the land above the high tide line is very intensively used. Birds have no places to roost. And there was an experiment that we did in 2018 where we created an artificial roost site for birds. It was created using old tires, car tires, yeah. And the day that the roost site was done, the next day there was 140 birds standing on it.
Wow.
So we know that there's a short supply of roosting habitat on the Korean coastline, and surely in many other parts of Asia. And this is again the demonstration of the importance of artificial habitats, especially as a roost site. It's been done, tried and tested in several parts of Australia. The Australians are pretty big on this thing. In fact, my team members that I worked with for this Korean project was actually driven by Australians. So the Australian experts and my colleagues, they went to Korea, scoped the area, talked to the local government. Again, you need the local government to be involved and engaged and interested and doing that over a long time.
Yeah.
So that's one demonstration of how artificial habitats can be used by biodiversity. In this case, I'm using migratory birds to demonstrate my argument here. Yeah, but there are many more other case studies. In the West, in Europe, many areas have been degraded over time, like agriculture. You go in, you create a new wetland, you create an artificial wetland, so to speak, and these wetlands eventually get populated by birds again. So artificial habitats do have a future, I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
How does creation of a new habitat work with, you know, like phylopatry and bird fidelity, like location fidelity?
The thing about many birds is that once they have finished breeding, they will move around to find new habitat. So these are the birds that are likely to colonize the new habitat. So, I mean, you name any bird, once they have fledged, they will try to find new habitat. And they don't want to be in their parents' habitat, right? They need to go out and find it. And that is the time that some of these birds may end up colonizing places that never existed, but turn out to be suitable for them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Just
Question.
a question to ask. Just now you mentioned about IBAs.
IBAs.
So are these man-made habitats that birds roost and also considered potential IBAs?
IBAs are at very large scales. So they are usually in the scale of 100 hectares or more.
So what about like expanses of farms?
Could be, because you must understand that there are parts of the world, especially in East Asia and in Europe, whereby the landscape has been heavily modified for centuries. Like in Western Europe, there's not much forest left in Western Europe. Most of Western Europe's landscape are now countryside, but lots of farmland. And there are areas of farmland that are used by really endangered species. Yeah, I'll give you two very famous threatened species that live on farmland in Europe. One is a species that has a rather unsavory name. It's called the great bustard.
Oh, yeah.
The great bustard uses a lot of farmland in Spain and in Central Europe. Another bird that is in Asia is called the sociable lapwing. It lives in the steppes of Central Asia, so the Genghis Khan steppes. But they migrate south to the Middle East and also to the western part of India. I've seen a lot of these sociable lapwings. They are considered as a critically endangered species. I've seen them mostly in Gujarat state in West India, in the wheat fields. Yeah. So it shows that the birds are using, and that area is part of a larger IBA. Yeah. IBAs don't have to be strictly protected areas. They could also involve landscape that are currently unprotected by law but are important to biodiversity. But now we are trying to broaden the scope of IBAs. When IBAs was developed by BirdLife about 20 over years ago, the focus was very much about birds and also on the understanding that birds are a good proxy of biodiversity in general. But in the last decade, the narrative has changed to look at biodiversity in a broader way. So a lot of IBAs now are not necessarily identified on the basis that they're important to birds, but also for other groups of animals like frogs. There are many IBAs. In fact, we have a new name for it. We call them KBAs, which stands for Key Biodiversity Areas. So KBAs are identified not necessarily for birds. It could be for a frog. There are many KBAs that are picked out from different parts of Papua New Guinea and Indonesia for some frog that has a very small distribution. For fish as well, freshwater fish, some of these fish have very small distributions. And obviously for many kinds of mammals around the world. So we,
On KBA, one more thing to ask.
yes.
Are there any KBAs that were previously KBAs but today they are not? Maybe the population of a certain
Have.
species has moved out.
Short answer is have. Yeah, animal went extinct, no more, not good for, or the place is in danger of being developed, but yet the animal is still there. They get another special classification called IBA in danger or KBA in danger, and then they get a little more prioritization for resources to protect that KBA or IBA. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks. Any other questions? Yeah.
A question about legislation. So just now you mentioned different countries have got different legislation.
Yes.
Protection of birds, right?
Yes.
Are there efforts to engage governments to standardize and list of
Yes, through international law and national laws. Yeah. So there are many kinds of laws and treaties to protect migratory birds. There are from the legal toolkit. I call it the legal toolkit. There are 3 kinds of legislations that we try to work on. For species that are found in large areas, like migratory species, we try to mobilize international law to their favor. So there are some international treaties like, have you heard of the Ramsar Convention? The Ramsar Convention is signed by 180 over countries. There's another piece that's very much focused on migratory species called the Convention on Migratory Species, and that treaty is signed by, I think it was 121 countries, including some really big countries in Asia, like India. India is a CMS country. So these countries who have ratified these treaties, they are legally obligated to pass laws at a national level to protect those birds. Yeah. So you've got these international treaties, but you've also got your national laws. And in some cases, now this is something probably new to some of you, there are also bilateral treaties that protect migratory species. In Asia, there are many examples. It doesn't affect Singapore, so nobody talks about them in Singapore. But one treaty that I'm really interested in is called the CRAMBA. It's called CRAMBA. It's the China-Russia Migratory Bird Agreement. And this agreement is signed by the governments of Russia and China. CRAMBA is really important because Russia is a big country and China is a big country, and both countries are not involved in the Convention on Migratory Species. So this treaty is very important because a lot of birds move back and forth from Russia to China. Having that piece of legislation in place can help many species in Russia and China. These 2 countries cover half of Asia, so having that law is really important. There are other longer distance ones. There's actually a bilateral agreement between the Australian government and the Korean government for migratory species protection. I'm not sure if you've heard of this. Have you heard of this piece of treaty? It is called the CAMBA. CAMBA because it's a migratory species bilateral agreement. It's basically MBA, so it's Korea, Australia, or Korea, Japan, Australia, or so on and so forth. Yeah. So there's a whole toolkit of legal arrangements to protect species at the multilateral level, at the bilateral level, and at the national level. And nowadays we're also looking at local regulations affecting very small pockets of land. You could have a village rule, like BirdLife has been working a lot with local communities in Indonesia to create these things called village agreements, whereby the villagers commit themselves to not hunting certain threatened species or taking certain things in a sustainable manner. Yeah. So there are lots of arrangements, frameworks, treaties, laws that are out there. And Singapore is very big on the Convention on Biological Diversity, which we are actually currently in the middle of a meeting where many countries are in Colombia negotiating the terms for the CBD. Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, I won't consider myself a legal scholar, so I cannot give you the broadest explanation of how all these treaties work. I know them in a general sense. I know they exist. I know that there are lists of birds that they protect, and I know that there are certain things that governments agreed to cooperate on. Yeah, but you probably need a legal scholar here to give you the deep dive into these arrangements. Yeah. Of which there are actually a few. I know 2 people in my circle of colleagues who are like legal scholars on migratory bird agreements. Yeah, and they spend all their life looking at all the treaties. What are the gaps? How can we improve them? And how can we better implement these treaties? Yeah.
Okay, maybe we'll have them on the chat the next time, and then you can ask those questions.
Yeah. Actually, I'm more a biologist. I can tackle more on questions of species and
conservation problems. Any other questions from the floor?
Yeah, throw up some
Yeah.
difficult questions if you have to. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
So I mean we're in quite a built-up urban environment.
Yeah.
And I'm sure across Asia, there's also lots of high-rise environments.
Plenty. Yeah.
How can these environments be modified to protect the species better?
That's a very good question.
Not mud flat, not
Yeah.
rainforest, but building. Can it be changed in some way?
I think your question is actually very relevant. I had that conversation 3 days ago at a meeting with HDB. There are many ways to make cities more hospitable for biodiversity, but it depends on what group of biodiversity you're talking about. I think Singapore is the world leader in having these initiatives embedded in the city to make the city broadly hospitable for wildlife. So one of the things that I'm really pleased to see, and should I say proud of, is to see that a lot of resources have been put into Singapore in building ecological connectivity. So you've got all these corridors, you've got the eco-link. You all know about the eco-link, right? The eco-link that if you take BK, when you pass Bukit Timah, there's this bridge with all these animals on them. That is the eco-link. I think the eco-link is actually a remarkable achievement for conservation in Singapore. I didn't expect it to be built. We didn't expect so much money to be invested in a creation like the eco-link. But the fact that it's now being built means that there's a lot of political commitment and interest in the topic. But at the same time, the science that is from the people who are out there collecting data shows that animals are actually moving across the eco-link. I think there was a newspaper article recently about the Raffles splendid leaf monkeys now on the Bukit Timah side. They used to be mostly on the central catchment side. So these corridors are really important for a lot of animals. But more broadly, the discussions about migratory birds and cities is how we can make cities hospitable to them. And one of the most common narrative is regarding the use of glass in building, in architecture, and the use of night lights. Because from the science that have emerged from North America and Europe, a lot of scientists are out there looking at how migratory birds are being killed by all these glass panels and night lights. You must have read articles from colleagues working in the US looking at thousands of birds that were killed by collisions with all these things. So that science is slowly coming to Asia. In the last 5 years, I can see more and more groups of researchers looking at this topic. There are several teams in China. There's a couple of teams in the Philippines looking and collecting these bird carcasses and trying to georeference where the carcasses were found to identify what's so important about this part of the city that birds are colliding with buildings. And I think in time to come that could translate to guidance, maybe even policy. You could start off with guidance, but policy as to how we can make these buildings more palatable to nature. I think one of the most important points for ecologists to consider is when these buildings that use a lot of glass are near to areas of greenery. And a lot of birds, they can't tell the difference between the reflection of the greenery versus the real thing. So some of the places in Singapore where we have seen a lot of animals, birds especially, colliding with the glass is where these buildings are really close to very green spaces. Yeah. So the question is, how do we deal with this? How do we work with the architecturists to develop and design buildings that have glass but not necessarily right in front of a piece of woodland? So you have to rethink how you build those things. You've got to also rethink how you use night lights. Yeah. In some parts of North America, the ornithologists, the conservationists, they're working with people who own these skyscrapers to shut the night lights on nights where lots of birds are believed to be migrating based on radar data. So by doing that, you avert huge numbers of mortalities. I think it's been done in New York City. I think it's been done in Chicago. I don't know if anybody is doing it in Asia, but I've actually always mentioned this to policymakers. You know, think about this. We know that many birds are smashing into buildings and killing themselves when migration peaks and when you have all these buildings and night lights. So there must be a way we can work with people who own those buildings to basically reduce the risks to migratory species. Yeah, I think China. There are many people in China looking at this topic currently. Yeah, and yeah, I think more to watch out in this space. Yeah, it's very much an emergent thing in Asia. Yeah.
So there's a similar thing happening in the coastal villages of India, but for sea turtles, where you know the day that the turtle eggs hatch, houses are told to shut off their lights so the turtles don't get confused by the lighting.
Yeah. I think you need commitment and you need local people to understand why they're doing that.
Yes.
Because the challenge for many is why should I go out of the way for something that I don't really care about? Yeah, getting people to get through some inconvenience for something that is, I think that's still a big challenge for many communities around the world. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a question.
Yeah.
I just want to bring up the question I actually posed in my email. It's also related to the artificial glass panels and all. So this is regarding the new upcoming emergent build-up of renewable power generation
Yes.
using solar panels.
Yes.
And you're going to have this whole field of glass shining light
Yeah,
everywhere.
yeah.
And also like offshore wind turbines.
Absolutely.
Do you think these are considerations on
Yeah.
prevention?
I hate to do this.
Changing of the migratory route.
I hate to do this, but I'm going to sell Koyo again. Yeah.
Go for it.
So BirdLife, we have been thinking about this problem for years. And recently we came out with a solution. We came out with a new toolkit for policymakers. It's newly launched, only 3 years old, called Every Step. And the whole idea of Every Step was to create a spatial planning tool at a reasonable amount of resolution with knowledge and information embedded at each resolution about what are the sensitive species of birds to collision with turbines, power lines, and what do you call that?
Yeah, the
Wind
turbines. Yeah.
wind turbines, yeah. So that is being done right now because we know that this is an emerging issue that will become very big in the years to come. We are now moving through a part in history where we are shifting from high dependence on fossil fuels to higher dependence on renewables. There's this transformation going on. I won't say it's transformation, it's slowly but steadily. In time to come, there will be more wind farms, there will be more solar farms around the world. So the idea was to roll out a toolkit that can help policymakers to figure out what are the most sensitive pixels of your country that you should never build a wind farm in or a solar farm in. This toolkit is called AVSTEP, AVISTEP.
It's on your website, I
Yeah,
think.
we can share. Yeah, it's avistep.birdlife.org. And using this toolkit, if you were a land use planner or policymaker, you can use the toolkit to I want to build a wind farm. Oh, this wind farm is in a pixel where there are lots of migratory species. Then you need to reconsider, rethink some of these things. We think that in the past it's been really hard for people to think about these sort of things, but having a land use planning toolkit is there to help them figure out things better. Of course, the toolkit does not have the last say because the pixelation is still quite large. The pixel is 5 by 5 kilometers. If your area is smaller than that, then it becomes a bit more challenging. We designed this for fairly large countries. Singapore is not
one of them.
such in terms of the resolution, it's not so good for Singapore. But when we want to plant a wind farm in Vietnam or Thailand, this is perfect, right? The resolution of these wind fields, solar fields are in that kind of resolution. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it is an emerging challenge for biodiversity, and it will just happen. The catch now for us is how we plan land use in a way that minimizes and, if necessarily, mitigate harm to biodiversity. I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm also mindful about time.
Do we have time? I don't know what time is right
so
now.
now we're at 8:30, and I
8:30,
think
okay.
some people might be hungry. So I think we actually ended off. We actually answered the question for the call to action, which is usually, I think, what can we do as citizen scientists to kind of aid bird conservation, I think, in our own backyards. I think understanding a little bit more about what their threats are, what we should be looking out for. it could also be campaigning for your own building management to be a little bit more sensitive. So be it putting strips along the glass panels.
Yeah.
I think I actually witnessed a bird slam itself into a glass panel as I was having lunch one day at Gardens by the Bay.
Right.
So not great. Died on the spot. So
just to add one point to you, I'm actually quite impressed by more young Singaporeans coming out to do biodiversity projects of their own, the places they live around. So in the last few years, I get contacted by more and more NUS students, NTU students, like, oh, I want to design a bird survey to look at some threatened species in this part of town. I say, why? Oh, I live near there. So I think it's a good sign that young people are more and more interested in biodiversity. There was one group that we worked with to develop a survey of straw-headed bulbuls in their estate.
Right.
Yeah, and I saw the group took it quite seriously from planning to implementation, and they even now want to publish their findings. So I think it's a sign that society as a whole, but even more so for young people, are paying attention to. Yeah.
So maybe you could give us a takeaway message, like what can we do in our backyard tomorrow? Yeah, could be the question. Like, as all of us would walk out of this room tomorrow, could there be something that we could do? It might not be like a project like publishing a paper.
Yeah, listen to I think for most of us, participating in citizen science is a really, you may think it's a very tiny contribution, but I find that a lot of times I actually get some really good data from the eBird platform. So people are like, oh, I'm just going birding for fun only. I have 3 hours free, I just go around. But sometimes you find something that's really important and has conservation value. So I say for those of you who are not citizen scientists, be a citizen scientist. And for those of you who are not members of nature societies or organizations, you can also join and be part of a nature group, because you learn from people that know things, but you also contribute to a bigger cause. Yeah. So, and this is really a shout out for my colleagues at the Nature Society. There are lots of very passionate and dedicated individuals there. Meet them, learn from them, and at the same time, you also contribute to citizen science initiatives. Yeah.
So how can people take part in that bird race? You said that's coming out in 2 weeks.
I think registration got maxed out last week.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
So we're kind of closed for this year. Usually we have a close couple of weeks before, because you need time to produce the merch for people.
Yeah.
So the sign up usually opens for a window of about 2 months. But next year, I promise you a bigger bird race. But not just that, if you join the Nature Society, you can also participate in nature walks to places that you don't really get to go easily, like Kranji Marshes. Kranji Marshes is a very special place.
Yeah.
I feel happy every time I go to Kranji Marshes, because you see migratory birds, you also see the local birds, and you see how a well-managed wetland should look like here.
And now is the migration season, right?
Now's the time.
So now's the time to go Kranji Marshes. Okay, go this weekend.
Yeah, and now's the time for migratory raptors as well. This couple of weeks, if you have nothing better to do at 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., I suggest you go to Mount Faber and stare at the sky. You will see raptors on migration. You didn't know that? Some people don't know that, but yeah, I find it surprising. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for that tip. So everyone go to Mount Faber now?
Oh, there's a question from my colleague.
Yeah, just a shout out. So even if you see a dead bird in Singapore, you can also contribute to citizen science. There's a NUS Avian Evolution Lab. So if you want a number, I can share it with you. Or I'll share it with the boss Facebook, and maybe they can do a
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah.
be it a dead bird or an animal.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for...
Yeah, and that initiative has been running for about 8 years already. Yeah, so there's a team of very dedicated NUS students going around to collect these carcasses. Now, you may be asking what those carcasses for. The carcasses contains tissue which you can use for future research projects, but at the same time, the location of the carcass can also tell you something about which part of Singapore is really high-risk areas for wildlife, birds colliding with windows and all that. Yeah, and it is from this kind of data that some of my colleagues, I don't know, some of you may know David Tan, who some of us work with, wrote a couple of reports And that report triggered a lot of discussion on bird collisions. Yeah.
Lovely. So yeah, every little bit counts. So yeah, so go to Mount Faber, go to Kranji Marshes, and collect bird data. So just to close off today, so thank you so much for joining us. And of course, if you guys would like to stay back and talk to, I think there are a couple of people here from NSS, and then from BirdLife, there is Stingley and Ariana, who's there. So yeah, you can chat with her.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to influence you.
Do more birding.
Yeah.
So so joining us next month for Wild Conversations is actually Dr. Amy Chung from the NUS Department of Biological Sciences. She teaches fungal biology and comparative botany, tropical horticulture and natural heritage of Singapore. And so she's going to teach us more about mushrooms, fungi, and what's the big deal about them. So yeah, join us end of next month, 21st of November. It's a Thursday, and it will also be here.
Definitely, I add on. She's my co-chair for my plant group.
Oh yeah, NSS, you see?
Yeah.
So if you join NSS, you'll get all the ins. And there's one more shout out for an event that we're doing that is happening next weekend. So next weekend you can go to Mount Faber and take the cable car into Sentosa, and you can come for the film festival that we are hosting. So it's called Earth in Focus at Siloso. It's at Siloso Beach. There will be film screenings, panel discussions, nature photography exhibition, and different types of workshops and masterclasses. We are at earthinfocus.co, both on Instagram and on our website. It is free to attend. All you have to do is just register for a ticket. It's just managing crowd control. So yeah, please join us, Mount Faber all the way to Siloso Beach. So yeah, thank you so much and have a good evening, everyone. Stay wacky, wild and curious. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks.
All right.